Well, good morning. Great to see you here. What a perfect way to begin our brand new year together, being together in church. I'm glad to be with each of you. Really glad to see you here today and trust that God has something for each one of us as we gather in this place on a weekly basis. Here it is, the first Sunday of a brand new year, and I'm guessing that it finds us in a lot of different places. Some of us are relieved that the holidays are over. Some are sad that it went too fast. Some are ready to move forward and tackle 2026 with abandon. Some are still wondering when decorations are going to come down. I don't know how last year ended for you or how the new year looks ahead. But my guess is that for many of us, no matter what kind of year we had, we could use a little spiritual renewal. Now, I'm not talking about another resolution because resolutions famously fail. Resolve to be more patient, that only lasts so long, right? And because it turns out traffic doesn't care if we made that resolution or not. Learn a new hobby, that's great until you realize that YouTube tutorials in real life don't necessarily match. Cut out the sugar, that lasts until you have the next crisis that demands ice cream. Or go to the gym more, I give that about 3 weeks. So no, I'm not suggesting today that we start another resolution. Instead, what if we started the year with a renewal? And the reason I say that is because when it comes to one of Jesus' most famous invitations, what's surprising is that he doesn't begin with a demand. He doesn't start by placing big expectations on us or calling us to some ambitious endeavor. He begins with an invitation. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. So open with me, if you will, to that very invitation in Matthew chapter 11, starting in verse 28. Matthew 11, verse 28. I want to recommend this passage as the focus for our new year. And as it turns out, it serves really as the perfect way to launch us into a whole series of renewal, which we will begin starting next week. So put that another way, if you're coming into the new year exhausted and spent, this message is definitely for you. On the other hand, if you're entering January motivated and energized, this message can help you sustain it. In fact, if that's you, I want to encourage you to think about your specific goals through the lens of this passage. On the other hand, if we ignore this invitation by Jesus, we can end up weary with no place to go and burdened without relief. So Matthew 11, starting in verse 28. Again, Jesus frames it this way: come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. I think it's so striking that Jesus leads with rest in this passage. He doesn't say do better, fix yourself, time to catch up spiritually. He begins, come to me, all of you, and I will give you rest. That's Jesus' starting place for you and me. So let me be as straightforward as I can. What if in 2026 we resolve to rest? That is, based upon Jesus' invitation, what if as we begin and enter into this year, we resolve to rest, let rest be our overarching priority? What if this year was a happy renewal year? Now, before you write that off as unrealistic or unambitious or negligent, let's slow down and take a closer look at this invitation. And I really hope you do. Because while every message I give is important, since it comes directly from this book that God has revealed His truth for us, while every message I give is important, this one really captures so much of what I so often want to say to people in their endeavors, in their decisions, and in their prayers. Instead of another resolution, what if we started with rest, renewal, and trust? Turns out there are 4 course corrections that lead to rest. In other words, when Jesus invites us to rest in Him, He's not simply adding something else to our lives. He's correcting some default ways of doing things that we already have. The first course correction becomes obvious in the first 3 words of Matthew 11:28. Jesus begins this famous passage by saying, "Come to me." Again, He doesn't begin with a command. He starts with an invitation, "Come to me." So the first course correction is this: begin the new year coming to a person, not just committing to a plan. Begin the new year coming to a person, not just committing to a plan. In other words, before you start the year with new goals and habits or behaviors, there's a relationship to consider. Come to me, Jesus says. So that rather than jumping right into performance, how about starting with drawing near? In John chapter 1, there's this classic encounter. 2 disciples come up to Jesus with a very practical question for Him. They say, "Rabbi, where are you staying?" In other words, what's the plan? What's next? What do you want us to do? Where do you want us to go? And wouldn't you agree that that's so often the way we come to Jesus as well? What's the plan for my life? What's next for me? What should I do? Where should I go? But what's fascinating is how Jesus responds. He doesn't give them a roadmap. He doesn't give them kind of an outline for the next few steps. Instead, this is what we read. Immediately after, He says, "Come," He replied, "and you will see." And then the Bible adds this: "So they went and saw where He was staying, and they spent the day with Him." In other words, instead of giving them a plan, Jesus invites them to be with Him. And that seems to be Jesus' way. He usually invites us closer before He invites us forward. So the first course correction is to begin the new year coming to a person, not just committing to a plan. Now let's look at how this passage unfolds. Jesus continues this way. He says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened." All you who are weary and burdened. So is this some kind of exclusive invitation only offered to those who are weary and burdened? No, it turns out weariness and overload are universal conditions. All of us find ourselves there at some time. Jesus invites the weary and the burdened to Him because that's a place where all of us land at one time or another. Therefore, the next course correction is this: acknowledge that weariness is a human reality, not a spiritual failure or flaw. Weariness and overload, being burdened, is a natural human experience. I say that because it's so easy to assume that if we're worn out or we're weighed down, that we must be doing something wrong spiritually. We somehow think that the spiritual life should give us endless energy and that faith should somehow make us immune to exhaustion. But Jesus doesn't scold us for being weary or burdened. Instead, He actually uses those as sort of the connection point for the invitation that He gives. Fatigue, turns out, is normal. Burdens are to be expected. Emotional drain, spiritual numbness, they are not a failure of faith. They are what it means to be fully engaged in this world. And Jesus uses them as a way of drawing us to Himself, assuming that this is a universal condition that all of us will experience along the way. Jesus meets us there in that condition and says, "Come to me." I mean, think about your phone. When your phone battery gets low, you don't assume the phone is broken. Wow, this phone must be defective. The battery is so low. You just think it needs to be charged. Low battery is not a failure. It's a sign the phone has been doing exactly what it was designed to do. When we live our lives as God has designed us to, loving, serving, showing up, it's normal to get drained. In fact, God set it up that way so that we would be reminded that we need to be recharged in His presence. So the second course correction we need to make if we're going to live the renewed life is to acknowledge that weariness is a human reality, not a spiritual flaw or failure. Okay, let's keep going. Notice how verse 28 ends. It says, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." That word give is important. I will give you rest. Rest is a gift. It's something that Jesus gives. It isn't something that we somehow build up credit towards. It's a blessing that God gives. So the next course correction that Jesus makes is this: receive rest as a gift, not as a reward. Rest is not a prize we get for gold star effort. Rest is received, not achieved. I love the way the Hebrew day is structured, especially compared to the way we tend to think about it in the West. For us, isn't this true? The day sort of operates like this. We work all day, and then at the end of the day, we collapse into rest. But in the Hebrew way of thinking, the day begins at sunset. In other words, the day starts with relaxing and a meal, with rest, which then enables us to work. We start with stopping, we start with trusting, and that's what fuels us for the activity that follows. Rest is not something we earn by hard work. It is God's gift that He gives to us to equip us for the day. And we can apply that to longer periods of time as well. Just as God designed us to start each new day with rest, so it's a perfect way to start the new year as well, with a focus on rest in Him. My wife and I have a little slogan that we try to live by. We have to remind each other often because it's not intuitive. But especially when we're heading into a particularly busy season, we'll say this to one another. We'll say, remember, rest before you're tired. That's the goal anyway. The idea is simple. Instead of waiting until you're completely drained, we try to prioritize replenishing and recharging from the start. Now, I should be clear, this doesn't mean that we get it right every time, and it certainly doesn't keep us from the normal weariness that life brings. As I said earlier, that's just a part of being human. But when we do pay attention to it, it helps us enter each busy season a little more grounded, a little more renewed, and a little more ready. In the same way for us, you and I, as we step into a brand new year, we know that it will come with its own demands and challenges. But if somehow you and I can embrace the idea to rest, to see rest as a gift from the beginning, we set ourselves up for a more sustainable journey. So the third course correction is to receive rest as a gift, not as a reward. The front end, not necessarily is something we earn and get credit for down the way. I will give you rest, Jesus said. Now, I'm guessing that at this point there's someone who is still a little agitated with all of this. They're thinking, come on, this is the beginning of the new year. Why not talk about goals and plans and jumping into frenzied activity with both feet? And I get it. And fortunately, Jesus does too. In fact, that's where He goes next. Jesus moves next into renewed behavior and activity. But even there, it only makes sense if you're already starting from a place of rest and renewal. If you've already accepted the invitation to come to Him and experience that rest, even there, Jesus is making course corrections in the way we think. Now look at verse 29 and 30. Noting, again, it's only after He issues His invitation to rest that Jesus gives these instructions. Verse 29, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Even the way He puts it is so different from our typical feverish self-efforts. Back then, a yoke was this wooden beam laid across the shoulder of two oxen working in the field. It joined them together. It shared the load. It set the pace. More than that, back then, a good yoke didn't crush the animal. It actually instead fit perfectly. In those days, rabbis also used the word yoke to talk about discipleship. It meant to take on the teacher's way of life, not just their teaching, but their very activity. So when Jesus talks about a yoke, he means a shared load, a shared pace, a shared way of life. So once again, we need to think about it this way. Once we begin the new year coming to a person, not just committing to a plan, and acknowledging weariness as a human reality, not just a spiritual failure, and receiving rest as a gift, not a reward, finally, we approach life with Jesus' help, pace, and heart. And each one of those words is important. First, we approach the new year with Jesus' help. That is, we realize we cannot shoulder the load on our own, nor were we meant to. We resist overzealous self-reliance and allow Jesus to carry the load with us. In other words, we start by coming to Jesus, but we never stop relying on Jesus once we get there. Next, we approach the new year with Jesus' pace. That is, we allow him to set the stride, the speed, the rhythm, which means we don't race ahead or lag behind. We let Jesus set the pace. Finally, we approach the new year with Jesus' heart. I'm thinking here of the phrase that Jesus uses here in the middle of verse 29. He says, "And learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart." As we step into every new or ongoing endeavor in 2026, allow Jesus' way and style to shape ours. Let his heart shape our hearts. It's not just about what we do, but how we do it. And just to make sure that we don't think that Jesus has switched gears here now, notice again how verse 29 ends, "And you will find rest for your souls." Jesus isn't switching gears. He's explaining how rest continues as we move into activity. When we approach life with Jesus' help, pace, and heart, we operate from a place of renewal and rest, not strain and control. And now look once more at the final phrase of this invitation, verse 30. It says, "For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." This underscores the final course correction. Jesus invites us to approach life with Jesus, with his help, with his pace, and with his heart, not a heavier load. In other words, this is a completely different approach to spiritual activity. Now let me clarify. When Jesus says easy, he doesn't mean simple. And when he says light, he doesn't mean effortless. In fact, the word for easy in the original language does not primarily mean requiring little or no work. It means kind, good, useful, suitable, serviceable. In everyday Greek, it could describe a tool that works the way it's supposed to, or a garment that fits perfectly, or even wine that is smooth rather than harsh. So when Jesus is saying, what he is saying is that when he shoulders the load with us, the tasks that he sends are well suited and designed uniquely for us. Certainly we'd have to admit that much of what God calls us to do is demanding and weighty. But since Jesus shoulders it with us, it is manageable. It fits. It's sustainable, even life-giving. There's been a lot of times in my life when I feel like the burden is too big or just too draining. And in those times, it's almost as if I sense Jesus would say to me, it is. It is too big and too draining for you, but not for you with me. So approach it with my help, my pace, my heart. So the final course correction is this: Jesus invites us to approach life with his help, pace, and heart, not a heavier load. So maybe 2026 can be a happy renewal year. In fact, everything I've said this morning sets us up, the sort of a prequel. I meant to be a trailer, anticipation of a brand new series that we begin next week, Making Room for Renewal. Our new series, Making Room for Renewal, will be an unhurried walk through Psalm 51. Together, we'll learn how simple, honest prayers can open us up into deeper and lasting transformation. Not a challenge, not a program, it's an invitation. To slow down, to tell the truth about ourselves, and make room for what God can do, and only he can. The renewing work of the soul. Over 5 weeks, we'll learn the power of 5 prayers. Lord, be gracious to me, cleanse me, create in me, teach me, open my eyes, open my lips. The last one goes together. Simple prayers, honest words, directly from Psalm 51 that help us make room for renewal. But it all begins with an invitation to start with coming to Jesus, acknowledging our weariness, receiving his gift of rest, and stepping forward with his help, his pace, and his heart, so that it can truly be a happy renewal year. Jesus, we come to you this morning thanking you for your wonderful invitation to us, and realizing that how often we race ahead and don't really stop to consider that. You are standing there with your arms welcoming us and calling us to you. So we come this morning not with answers, but with ourselves. We come trusting you to do what you can do in us as you invite us into this partnered life, as we live with you in this world and be the people that you've called us uniquely to be. Protect us from our own endeavors that would be independent and isolated from you, and lead us in your way and in your will with your heart. Thank you today for the opportunity to give, and we ask your blessing on the gifts and the givers today as we enter this new year. In Jesus' name, amen.